Hello, this is Sally's book review. Listen to great books every day, bringing you the best books from around the world. Last time, we covered Western art history from ancient Greece to the late 18th century, where artists evolved from rarely leaving their names to awakening self-awareness during the Renaissance. However, due to patronage relationships, they still had to paint according to their employers' demands, restricting their creative freedom. Like 18th century Rococo artists who created lighthearted art catering to aristocratic pleasures, masking social tensions. But by the late 18th century, on the eve of the French Revolution, Rococo art could no longer conceal France's crumbling foundations. Post-aristocratic 19th century art diversified into three main movements: Neoclassicism, Romanticism, and Realism. Let's begin with Neoclassicism. Its core principle was rationality. Archaeological excavations had rediscovered Pompeii, an ancient Roman city buried in volcanic ash, sparking fascination with classical culture. Moreover, Rome's celebration of heroism aligned perfectly with French revolutionaries' ideals. Neoclassical art revived classical order, blended Roman inspiration with revolutionary spirit, championing bourgeois values, liberty, equality, fraternity. Jacques-Louis David emerged as a leading neoclassical master and the French Revolution's preeminent painter. David frequently depicted Roman themes, exemplified by his masterpiece, The Oath of the Horatii. The painting shows three Horati brothers, swearing to defend Rome against enemies. David captured their oath before their father, a powerful symbol of neoclassical ideals, collective duty overriding personal sacrifice. From 1789, David actively participated in the revolution, serving on civic education and arts committees. Thus, his art wielded tremendous influence during this era. Later, he became Napoleon's principal court painter, creating numerous imperial portraits. After Napoleon's exile to Elba, David lost his patron, was banished from France, and died abroad. His most famous student, Ingres, inherited the mantle of neoclassicism. Unlike his teacher, Ingres wasn't politically driven, but focused purely on artistic creation. Beyond historical and mythological themes, he painted numerous portraits and odalisques with Orientalist flair. Portraits paid the bills, while his female nudes represented his true artistic pursuit. In these paintings, Ingres infused his own vision of beauty, capturing feminine grace and elegance. For example, his Grand Odalisque depicts a Turkish courtesan facing away from the viewer. To emphasize her sinuous form, Ingres elongated her spine. Critics joked she had 3 extra vertebrae. This clearly shows Greek ideals influencing Ingres, who focused on classical tradition rather than David's revolutionary fervor. From David to Ingres, we see neoclassicism evolving from revolutionary zeal to structured order. Ingres' neoclassicism dominated 19th century French academic art. Meanwhile, Romanticism emerged as its passionate counterpoint, championing emotion over neoclassical reason. Its figurehead Delacroix became Ingres' rival. Romantic artists broke conventions, valuing personal expression, individuality, and raw passion. They rejected neoclassical rationality, embracing mythology, the supernatural, and imaginative realms. Delacroix's masterpiece, Liberty Leading the People, even graced 100 franc notes, showing his revered status in France. Its central figure, a bare-breasted woman waving the French tricolor, is Delacroix's allegorical liberty. Delacroix opposed academic rigidity, believing it stifled emotional expression. For him, painting required fiery passion, with color conveying emotion, earning his style the nickname the Massacre of Painting. Mid-19th century, Neoclassicism, represented by Ingres, and Romanticism by Delacroix, both participated in an art exhibition called the World's Fair. One painter also sent his works but had 3 rejected. Frustrated, he self-funded a solo exhibition next to the fair, proclaiming it realism. This was Courbet, the representative of realism. This exhibition marked the emergence of the third major movement in mid-19th century French art, realism, represented by Courbet. The key word for this style is reality. On one hand, he opposed conservative classicism, finding it outdated. On the other, he rejected Romanticism as detached from reality. Realism advocates seeing is believing, faithfully depicting visible life and contemporary people and events. Courbet, the figurehead of realism, said, "I won't paint angels because I've never seen one." This brilliant artist once participated in a workers' uprising in 1871 when the Paris Commune was established. He served as its committee member and president of the Artists' Association. He depicted lower-class laborers, like in his work, The Stonebreakers. The painting simply shows a worker kneeling to break stones and a young laborer carrying stones. In this mundane work scene, there's no praise or glorification. It hints at the hardship and monotony of labor. To summarize, 19th century Western art had three main movements, one emphasizing reason, classical, another emphasizing emotion, romanticism, and the last one emphasizing reality, realism. At this point, you'll notice artists began emphasizing artistic freedom and engaging in social life. They no longer stayed secluded in studios, but used art to participate in and influence societal development. Academic artists, like Ingres, though apolitical, exerted unshakable influence through their stature in art academies. Others painted current events, exhibiting publicly to stir public opinion through imagery. Why did this phenomenon occur? Because during this period, a new art market system met this demand. Previously, most artists worked on private commissions. So, to satisfy employers, artists sometimes had to compromise. But the new art market allowed selling works through intermediaries like galleries, freeing artists from direct client demands. With basic needs met and no need to please patrons, artists began voicing their perspectives, even becoming iconoclastic. Edouard Manet was considered such a rebel in his day. His exhibited work, Luncheon on the Grass, depicted a nude woman seated before two well-dressed gentlemen, provoking public outrage. They deemed the scene indecent and morally corrupt. Since Manet painted contemporary figures rather than mythological subjects, this depicted a real-life scenario. A woman openly nude before men, calmly confronting viewers, was seen as depicting a shameless prostitute. What was the painter expressing? Though depicting reality, its composition references a Renaissance pastoral concert painting. Monet transformed the delicate rendering into broad, flat brushstrokes. Using this modern technique with contemporary content declared his innovative stance. Monet's significance lies in challenging conventions and paving the way for Impressionism. Monet associated closely with Impressionists who regarded him as a leader. Now we explore modern art's complex movements, where artists evolved from anonymity to celebrity status. We begin with late 19th century Impressionism, its keyword being objective impression. In 1874, Monet, Pissarro, and others organized an independent exhibition opposing the official salon titled Exhibition of the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Printmakers. A critic, seeing Monet's impression, Sunrise, sarcastically dubbed it the Exhibition of Impressionists. Unexpectedly, triumphantly, this derisive comment named the movement, making Impressionism iconic in Western art. So why did that critic mock them? Impressionists abandoned symbolic meaning, capturing fleeting light and color as perceived by the eye, working rapidly to render transient impressions, resulting in seemingly sketch-like works. That's why the critic called them Impressionists. Yet their paintings became filled with hazy atmospherics and dazzling colors. You might think this sounds similar to realism. While Impressionism inherited elements from realism, key differences exist. First, realism paints what's seen. Impressionism paints how it's perceived. Second, realism carries subjective stance, like photojournalism. But Impressionism maintains neutral objectivity, pure landscape photography. Hence, its essence is objective impression. From 1874, Impressionists held 8 exhibitions over 12 years. Cézanne from Provence participated in 2. Gradually, he felt Impressionism only captured surface impressions, lacking intellectual depth. Facing prejudice against his work, Cézanne retreated home to work independently. Cézanne, Gauguin, and Van Gogh, whose works later appeared together. When exhibited in England, they were dubbed post-impressionists. Post-impressionism's keyword is subjective impression, a reaction against impressionism's objectivity, emphasizing inner worlds. They intuitively reorganized lines, colors, and forms, exaggerating or distorting to express personal emotions. Thus, post-impressionism's essence is subjective impression, though Cézanne, Gauguin, and Van Gogh each developed distinct styles. Let's examine them separately. Cézanne was a rich heir. His father sent him to Paris to study law and inherit the family bank. But he devoted himself to painting instead. Cézanne focused on portraits, still lifes, and landscapes. He explored structural essence using geometric forms to systematize nature. This required slow, thoughtful painting, exacerbating his notorious temper. During portraits, if models shifted slightly, he'd erupt in curses. Hence, he mostly painted immobile subjects, apples, jars, and landscapes. Another post-impressionist, Gauguin, also worked in banking before turning to art. British novelist Maugham's masterpiece, The Moon and Sixpence, was based on him as the prototype. After turning to art, Gauguin lived in poverty. To save money, he went to Brittany in southern France and later to Tahiti in the South Pacific to create art depicting the primitive life of local indigenous people. Due to promiscuous sexual behavior, he contracted syphilis. Around that time, his daughter died of illness. Desperate, he once ingested arsenic on a mountain to commit suicide but was saved. Gauguin's paintings resemble stained glass and Chinese cloisonné, using simple, large blocks of pure, intense colors for a primitive, exotic feel. To the general public, Van Gogh is probably the most famous post-impressionist. He once worked as a gallery employee, but his blunt and outspoken nature easily offended customers. He also preached in mines. With a kind heart, he sympathized with miners, but this angered the mine owners. Eventually, he resolved to pursue painting, and his brother Theo became the patron of his art career. In southern France, Van Gogh painted with Gauguin. The two often quarreled, leading Van Gogh, in a psychotic episode, to cut off his own left ear. During his mental illness, he painted many moving masterpieces, but the illness ultimately drained him. Influenced by Impressionism, Van Gogh rarely mixed colors, directly using bright, pure hues. He liked using brushes loaded with paint, leaving strong brushstrokes on the canvas. Thus, his works are thickly painted with textured surfaces. The colors and brushstrokes convey Van Gogh's intense inner emotions and hallucinatory scenes, making his sunflowers, wheat fields, etc., full of emotional depth. To summarize, the main art movements of the late 19th century were Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. Impressionism's keyword is objective impression, and Post-Impressionism's is subjective impression. Although Post-Impressionist painters weren't recognized in their lifetimes, they were highly regarded after death, influencing 20th century modernist art. Modernist art is actually a broad generalization because 20th century art movements and styles were numerous. Their commonality is a certain degree of anti-traditionalism. This anti-traditionalism refers to Western classical art from ancient Greece and Rome onwards. Therefore, we can summarize modernist art with the keyword rebellion. 20th century modernist art encompassed over a dozen movements like Cubism and Fauvism. We'll focus on 2 pivotal artists, Picasso and Duchamp. Why Picasso specifically? Because Picasso's style evolved dramatically His relentless experimentation epitomized modernist art. In 1907, France's Salon d'Automne held a Cézanne retrospective. His geometric explorations inspired young artists, most notably Picasso. Picasso, Spanish by birth, was a prodigious talent. He claimed he painted like Raphael by 16, sounded rather narcissistic. Yet, truthfully, he exhibited in Barcelona at just 15. Arriving in Paris around 1900, he endured poverty and a close friend's death. This melancholic phase, dominated by blues, became his blue period. Around 1905, perhaps love lifted his spirits. He embraced pinks and roses, launching his rose period. Soon came pivotal patrons, the Stein siblings, avant-garde art's crucial supporters. If you've seen Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, Gertrude Stein is the lesbian salon hostess portrayed. This visionary patron encouraged artistic experimentation. Around this time, Picasso created his groundbreaking Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Here, Picasso fused Cézanne's geometric analysis with inspiration from African masks. He literally painted African masks onto the figures' heads, hence the grotesque figures. But why is this work so revolutionary? Starting with Les Demoiselles, Picasso fragmented and reassembled forms, combining frontal, profile, top, and bottom views simultaneously, like photographing each angle, then tracing all contours onto one surface, the birth of analytical cubism. The Cubist period, as the name suggests, required extensive rational analysis to combine different facets of objects. During this phase, Picasso's portraits of his wife show eyes facing front, noses in profile, yet headpieces turned right, creating unsettling compositions. By 1912, he began incorporating real-world scraps like old newspapers and cardboard, collaging them onto paintings, adding lines to unify the composition. These works became known as synthetic cubism, and meaning paintings synthesizing multiple elements and patterns. Beyond Picasso, we discuss another figure, Marcel Duchamp. His name might be unfamiliar, but you've likely heard of a perplexing artwork, a urinal, one of Duchamp's seminal pieces. Why examine him? Because he's considered postmodernism's progenitor. French-born, nearly his entire family were painters. He initially painted too, but around WWI, he moved to America and began his artistic deconstruction. In 1917, he purchased a urinal, signed it, and submitted it to an exhibition, sparking massive controversy. This approach later became known as ready-made art. Artists selecting everyday objects as artwork, shocking then, still perplexing today. It fundamentally challenged artistic conventions. Duchamp aimed to shatter traditional notions, declaring art and life should be equal. By this era, artists resembled intellectuals. Late 19th to early 20th century saw artists pursuing misunderstood ideals, some descending into madness, others starving. Even today, many believe artists must die before their work gains value. Art prices skyrocket, with headlines announcing astronomical auction sums. The reasons are complex. First, art history and criticism flourished. Scholars championed select artists, cementing their legacies. For instance, the status of post-impressionism in art history largely hinges on British critic Roger Fry. Moreover, museums' art collections play a big role in defining which artists and artworks are valuable and which aren't. And by opening to the public, they reinforce this idea. Thanks to various influences, artists' status has soared. They're even seen as pioneers of human civilization. Many artists also aim to express their views on the world and society through art. So their art gets more philosophical and complex, making it harder to understand over time. All right, we've covered the whole Western art history, using keywords to sum up different periods, with artist status as the common thread. We see that Western art history started with the Renaissance. Before that, unnamed artists were just craftsmen with low status. After the Renaissance, more artists left their names and art became linked to scientific knowledge. Artists' status rose higher They gained economic independence, voiced opinions, and joined social movements. By the 19th and 20th centuries, artist status peaked. They became like philosophers and thinkers with higher social standing. And as a result, artworks got way more expensive. Okay, that's the wrap for this Western art history interpretation. Keynotes are below the audio. See you tomorrow. Ah!